The greatest gift you could give me, Dad, would be to leave once and for all. My name is Edward Miller. I'm 68 years old, and those words you just heard, those damned words, were spoken by my own son, Robert, looking me straight in the eye. And believe me when I tell you that after hearing that, my life changed forever. Listen to this story all the way to the end, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything about family, sacrifice, and justice. And afterward, you tell me, what would you have done in my place? And also tell me what city you're listening from, okay? Share this story with anyone who needs to hear it, because there are lessons here that hurt, but that we all should learn. Let me start from the beginning, so you understand how we got to that moment, so you understand who I am, and more importantly, so you understand everything I did for that boy who said such a barbaric thing to me. I was born right here in Chicago, in a humble family from a tough neighborhood on the South Side. My dad was a carpenter. My mom washed other people's clothes to make a few extra dollars. There were 5 of us kids, and I was the youngest. As long as I can remember, I knew what it was like to not have. Not having money for school shoes, not having money for medicine when someone got sick, not having those little things that other kids took for granted. But you know what? That poverty taught me something that many rich people never learn: the value of hard work and the meaning of the word sacrifice. At 14, I dropped out of school to work, not because I wanted to, but because my family needed me. I started as a helper at a butcher shop in the old city market. I woke up at 4 in the morning. I helped unload the meat. I cleaned, I swept, I did whatever they asked me to do. I earned pennies, but they were my pennies. The owner of the butcher shop, Mr. Aurelio, was a tough man, but fair. He taught me that in life, nobody is going to hand you anything. "Edward," he'd say to me while sharpening his knives, "the one who wants to get ahead has to work twice as hard as everyone else. And when he thinks he's worked enough, he has to work 3 times as hard." Those words were etched into my soul. For 5 years I worked in that butcher shop. 5 years watching customers with money come in, buying the best cuts, while I could only take home the bones and trimmings that Mr. Aurelio gave me. But I never complained. I never felt envious, because I knew that one day if I worked hard enough I could buy those cuts too. At 19 I met my Mary Helen. Oh, what a beautiful woman. She worked at a bakery near the market. She had brown eyes that shone like honey in the sun, and a smile that could brighten even the grayest day. But what made me fall in love with her most wasn't her beauty, but her heart. She was good, generous, hardworking. Just like me, she came from a humble family and knew what every dollar cost. We started dating and dreaming together. We dreamed of having a family, of owning our own house, of giving our future children everything we never had. But above all, we dreamed of dignity, of not having to ask anyone for anything. I married Mary Helen when I turned 23. The wedding was simple, at the local parish church, with just our families and a few close friends. For our honeymoon, we went to Myrtle Beach, but only for 2 days because we couldn't miss much work. But they were the 2 happiest days of my life. The following year, our first daughter, Sarah, was born. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I cried like a baby, not from sadness but from happiness and fear. Happiness because I held in my hands the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Fear because I knew I now had an enormous responsibility to make sure that little girl never went through what I had gone through. 2 years later, Robert arrived. My Robert, my son. The day he was born, I silently swore to him that he would never know poverty, that he would never have to drop out of school to work, that he would have all the opportunities I never had. By then, I had already left the butcher shop and started my own business. Nothing big, nothing extraordinary. A small burger stand in the market. But it was mine, completely mine. Do you know how I started? With 7 years' worth of savings from working for Mr. Aurelio. Every dollar I had earned, every extra cent, I had saved it all religiously. Mary Helen helped me. She also saved from her job at the bakery. We lived on the bare minimum to be able to save that money. We bought an old griddle, some used pots. We built the wooden tables ourselves. The first day I opened my stand, I sold exactly 12 burgers. 12. But to me, it was as if I had sold 100. The first few years were hard, very hard. Mary Helen and I worked from 5 inches the morning, prepping the meat, chopping vegetables, making the sauces. We didn't close until 11 at night. The kids stayed with my mother-in-law during the day, and we only saw them when we got home, already tired and smelling like grease and onions. But little by little, the business started to grow. People began to know Edward's Burgers. My signature double cheeseburger became famous in the market, then in the neighborhood, then in that whole part of the city. By the third year, I was able to hire my first employee. By the fifth year, I opened a second stand in another market. By the time Robert turned 10, I already had 3 stands and was saving to open my first formal restaurant. During all that time, my children never lacked anything. Robert and Sarah went to the best private school I could afford. They had new clothes, toys, everything they asked for. When Robert wanted a bicycle, I worked double shifts until I had the money. When Sarah wanted piano lessons, I sold my watch to pay the monthly fees. And you know what? Never, not once, did I throw a single dollar I spent on them in their faces. Because for me, giving them everything was my obligation as a dad. It was my way of showing them that I loved them more than my own life. Robert was a smart kid, very smart. From a young age, he was good with numbers, computers, all that technology stuff. I didn't understand any of it, but I saw that my son had a special gift. And that's why I decided he was going to college, no matter what it cost. Because I had a dream that got me up every day at 5 inches the morning and kept me working until 11 at night. I dreamed that my children would be professionals. I dreamed that they would have a better life than mine. I dreamed that they would never have to work with their hands full of grease just to be able to eat. And believe me, I did everything humanly possible to make that dream come true. But sometimes, when you give everything for someone, when you sacrifice your own comfort, your own rest, your own happiness to make someone else happy, sometimes that person gets so used to receiving that they forget to be grateful. And sometimes, that person you love more than anything in the world can become your worst nightmare. But I'll tell you about that later. By the time Robert turned 18, I already had 7 restaurants. Edward's Burgers, in different neighborhoods in Chicago. We weren't millionaires, but we were prosperous. And all that money I had earned, all that effort, had only one purpose: to make sure my children had the doors open to any future they wanted. My Mary Helen, may she rest in peace, always used to tell me, "Edward, don't give them so much. You're going to spoil them." But I didn't listen to her. Because when you've gone hungry as a child, when you've had to walk barefoot because there was no money for shoes, the only thing you want is for your children to never feel that desperation. Robert graduated from high school at the top of his class. He was brilliant, that boy. He had a quick mind for business and an incredible ability to understand everything related to computers and the internet. I, who barely knew how to use a calculator, watched him handle those machines as if it were magic. "Dad," Robert told me when he was 17, "the future is in technology, in digital marketing. Companies are going to need to advertise online." I didn't really understand what digital marketing was, but if my son said it was the future, then I believed him. Because to me, Robert was the smartest one in the family, the one who had studied, the one who knew about modern things. When it came time to choose a university, Robert wanted to study marketing at Northwestern University. Do you know how much that private university cost? A fortune. More money than many families see in their entire lives. But I didn't hesitate for a second. "My son," I told him, "if that's the university you want, that's where you'll study." I had to mortgage 2 of my restaurants to pay the tuition. Mary Helen worried about the risk, but I explained to her, "Honey, this is an investment. Robert is going to graduate as a professional and will earn more in a month than I earn in 6. For 5 years I paid for that university. 5 years working like crazy so that my son would never lack anything. Not just the tuition. I also paid for an apartment near campus, a used but decent car, his food expenses, his books, everything he needed. Robert was a good student, but he also liked the social life. He hung out with kids from rich families, went to expensive parties, wore designer clothes, and I, like the fool I was, sent him extra money every month so he wouldn't feel less than his friends. "Dad," he'd say on the phone, "I need an extra $1,000 this month. There's a special project at school." And I would send it to him, without asking exactly what it was for. Because I trusted him. Because I believed everything he was doing was for his education. In his 3rd year, Robert called to tell me he had met a girl. Her name was Patricia. She studied graphic design, and according to him, she was the love of his life. "Is she a good girl?" I asked him. "Yes, Dad, very good and very smart. I think I think I'm going to marry her when I graduate. I was very happy. I thought that if Robert had found someone special, maybe they would settle down, maybe he would take life more seriously. I met Patricia when Robert brought her home for Christmas vacation. She was pretty, elegant, well-dressed, but from the first moment I noticed something in her eyes, a coldness, as if she were sizing me up, evaluating how much money I had. During that dinner, Patricia asked a lot of questions about my restaurants. How many did I have? What neighborhoods were they in? How well were they doing? I, naive as always, thought it was genuine curiosity. I thought she was interested in her boyfriend's family. But Mary Helen, who had a special instinct for reading people, told me that night, "Edward, I don't have a good feeling about that girl. There's something about her I don't like." "Oh, honey," I replied, "you're being too harsh. Robert loves her, and that's what matters." "I hope you're right," my wife said. But in her voice there was a worry that I didn't know how to interpret at the time. When Robert graduated from college, I threw a big party in my backyard. I invited the whole family, my restaurant employees, the neighbors. I was so proud of my son. He was the first professional in the Miller family, the first one who had gone to college. During his thank you speech that night, Robert hugged me in front of everyone and said, "Dad, everything I am, I owe to you. Thank you for believing in me." I cried like a baby. It was the happiest moment of my life as a father. I felt that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. 3 months later, Robert came to talk to me about his business idea. "Dad," he said, "I want to start my own digital marketing company. I've already studied the market. There's a lot of demand, and I think we can earn a lot of money." "How much do you need?" I asked without a second thought. "To start properly, to rent a decent office, buy computers, hire employees, I need about $500,000. $500,000. It was a lot of money, more than I had in cash. But Robert was my most important investment. He was my future. I sold 2 of my restaurants to give him that startup money. The same restaurants I had built with my own hands, where I had worked 18-hour days for years. I sold them without hesitation. "Son," I told him when I handed him the check, "this money represents 20 years of my life. Use it well." "Don't worry, Dad. In 2 years, I'll pay you back double." Robert opened his company, Digital Miller, in a nice office in Lincoln Park. He hired designers, programmers, secretaries. Everything looked very professional, very modern. The first few months were tough, as is normal for any new business. But then, clients started coming in. Companies that wanted websites, social media advertising, digital campaigns. Robert was good at what he did, I have to admit. A year after opening the company, Robert married Patricia. I paid for the entire wedding. It was in a beautiful church in Old Town, with a live band, a banquet for 200 people, a honeymoon in Europe. I spent over $500,000 on that wedding. "He's my only son," I explained to Mary Helen when she worried about the expense. "He only gets married once." As a wedding gift, I bought them a house, a beautiful house in Lincoln Park, near Robert's office. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard, a 2-car garage. The house of my dreams when I was young. Patricia cried with joy when I gave them the keys. Robert hugged me and said, "Dad, you're the best dad in the world." At that moment, I was the happiest man on the planet. But you know the funny thing about happiness? Sometimes, when you think you have it all, when you think you've done everything right, life has a surprise waiting for you. A surprise that will hurt you more than you ever imagined. The first 2 years after Robert got married were the most beautiful of my life as a grandfather. Yes, because a year and a half after they married, Patricia got pregnant. When Robert gave me the news, I cried with joy. I was going to be a grandfather. My family name was going to continue. "What are you going to name him?" I asked excitedly. "If it's a boy, Matthew," Robert replied. "Like his great-grandfather?" Matthew had been my father, the humble carpenter who died when I was 20. The fact that Robert wanted to name his son after my dad moved me so much that I couldn't speak for several minutes. During Patricia's pregnancy, I became the most attentive father-in-law in the world. I brought her food from my restaurants. I took her to the doctor when Robert couldn't. I bought her anything she craved. Mary Helen scolded me. "Edward, you're spoiling them too much." But I couldn't help it. It was my first grandchild. When Matthew was born, it was like reliving Robert's birth. That tiny, wrinkled baby, with his dad's eyes and his mom's pert nose. I spent hours watching him sleep in the hospital, silently promising him that I would be the most present grandfather in history. and I kept that promise. During Matthew's first few years, I was there for everything. If Patricia needed someone to watch the baby, I closed the restaurant early and rushed over. If Matthew got sick, I paid for the best private doctors. When he turned 3, I bought him a tricycle that cost more than what many families spend on food in a month. Robert seemed to appreciate everything I did. He would say, "Thanks, Dad," when I helped him with something. He would hug me when I gave him extra money for some house expense. He even started asking me for business advice. "Dad," he'd say, "you have experience managing employees. How do I get them to work better?" I felt useful, important. My son needed me, respected me, consulted me on important things. Or at least, that's what I believed. But as Matthew got older, I started to notice small changes in Robert and Patricia. Changes so subtle that at first, I thought it was my imagination. For example, when I showed up to visit without calling first, Patricia would make a face like she was annoyed. "Oh, Dad," she'd say, with a forced smile. "You should have called first. The house is a mess." Or when I played with Matthew in the yard, Robert would tell me, "Dad, don't spoil him so much. He's already too coddled." "He's my grandson," I'd reply. "Grandsons are meant to be spoiled." "But he's my son," Robert would answer, with a tone he hadn't used with me before, a drier, more distant tone. I also started to notice that when I arrived at the house, Robert and Patricia would stop talking, as if they had been arguing about something they didn't want me to hear. One afternoon I arrived earlier than usual, and overheard part of a conversation between them in the kitchen. "I'm sick of him just showing up whenever he feels like it," Patricia was saying. "He's my dad," Robert replied, but without much conviction. "Well, tell him to call before he comes. This is our house, not his." I just stood in the doorway, holding the bags of food I had brought, feeling as if I'd been punched in the stomach. But I thought, maybe Patricia is stressed. Women can be difficult sometimes after childbirth. However, the comments continued, and they got worse. "Dad," Patricia would say when I gave her extra money for Matthew's expenses, "it's not necessary for you to help us so much anymore. Robert is earning good money with his company." "It's my pleasure to help," I'd reply. "That's what family is for." "But we want to be independent," she insisted, looking at Robert as if expecting him to back her up. Robert just stayed silent, and his silence hurt me more than any words. Then they started with comments about my clothes, my way of speaking, my manners. "Grandpa," Matthew said to me one day while we were playing, "Mommy says you talk like a hick." I laughed so I wouldn't cry. "And what's wrong with talking like a hick, son?" "I don't know," the boy replied, with that innocence only children have. "Mommy says it's embarrassing." Embarrassing. I, who had worked 40 years to give them everything they had, was embarrassing to them. But what hurt the most was when they started forgetting to invite me to important things. They celebrated Matthew's 4th birthday without telling me. I found out by chance when I went to visit and saw the balloons and leftover cake. "Why didn't you tell me it was Matthew's party?" I asked, trying not to sound hurt. "Oh, Dad," Patricia replied. "It was just a tiny thing, just the 3 of us. We didn't think it was worth bothering you." But I saw the pictures on her phone. It hadn't been just the 3 of them. Patricia's parents were there, some friends, other children. Everyone but me. When Robert started making more money with his company, things got worse. He no longer needed me to lend him money for emergencies. He no longer asked for my business advice. He no longer said thanks, Dad, when I helped him with something. Instead, he started making comments about how outdated my work methods were. "Dad," he'd say when I told him something about my restaurants, "you still run things so old school. You should modernize. Use technology." "Son," I'd reply, "these old school methods have put food on the table for 40 years. But times are changing, Dad. You can't work like it's the 80 seconds anymore." Like it's the 80 seconds? As if all my work was obsolete, as if all my effort was a thing of the past. And Patricia? Oh, Patricia got much worse. She didn't even pretend to like me anymore. When I arrived at the house, she would grab Matthew and take him to his room. "Matthew has homework," she'd say. Or, "Matthew needs to rest." Always some excuse so I couldn't be with my grandson. One day, when Matthew was 5, he asked me himself, "Grandpa, why does Mommy get mad when you come to visit?" That question broke my heart. My own grandson had noticed his mother's hostility towards me. "She doesn't get mad, son," I lied. She's just tired. But Matthew was a smart kid. Yes, she does get mad, Grandpa. And sometimes I hear her talking to Dad about you when they think I'm asleep. What could I say to him? That his mother hated me? That his father no longer defended me? That the family I had sacrificed my whole life for was slowly throwing me in the trash? Mary Helen, who was already sick by then, would tell me, "Edward, open your eyes. Those two are disrespecting you." "Don't exaggerate, honey," I'd reply. "These are normal family things." But deep down, I knew my wife was right. I knew something had broken between Robert and me, something that maybe couldn't be fixed. The problem was, I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to accept that the son I had given everything for, the boy I had carried in my arms, the one I had taught to ride a bike, the one I had sold my restaurants for. I didn't want to accept that this son no longer wanted me in his life. But the truth has a cruel way of revealing itself, and sometimes it arrives in the most painful way possible. When Mary Helen died, I lost more than my wife. I lost the only person who defended me, who understood me, who saw things as they really were. Cancer took her in 6 months. 6 terrible months where I divided my time between caring for her in the hospital and keeping my restaurants running. Robert came to the hospital a few times during those 6 months. A few. Patricia almost never showed up. "She's very busy with Matthew," Robert would explain when I asked why his wife didn't come to see her dying mother-in-law. The day Mary Helen died, I was alone with her, holding her hand as she slowly slipped away. Robert arrived 2 hours after she passed, when it was all over. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I had an important meeting with a client. I couldn't cancel it." A meeting. More important than saying goodbye to the woman who had loved him like a son since he was 20. During the funeral, Patricia kept her distance from me. She didn't even say, "I'm sorry for your loss," or, "Mary Helen was a great woman." Nothing. She stood in a corner, checking her phone as if she were anywhere but at my wife's funeral. After the burial, when everyone had left, I stood by Mary Helen's grave, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. "You see, honey," I said to her headstone, "you were right about Patricia, and maybe about Robert, too. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. Without Mary Helen, the house felt empty, silent. I'd come home from work, and there was no one waiting for me. No one to ask me how my day was. No one to talk to while I ate dinner. I thought that Robert, seeing his dad going through such a hard time, would get closer to me. I thought maybe Patricia would understand that I needed to be near my family, especially my grandson. But it was the exact opposite. "Dad," Robert said to me one afternoon when I went to visit, "I think it would be good for you to find an activity, something to keep you busy." "What kind of activity?" I asked. "I don't know, maybe a club for people your age or some classes. There are lots of things for seniors." Seniors. As if I were a nuisance that needed to be entertained somewhere. "Robert," I said, "the only thing I want is to be near my family, near you, near Matthew, after losing your mom." "Dad," he interrupted, "we have our own lives, our own routines. Patricia works from home now, I have the company, Matthew has school. We can't be looking after you all the time. Looking after me. As if I were a burden, as if asking for a little company was asking too much." Patricia, who had been listening from the kitchen, approached with that fake smile I knew so well. "Dad," she said, "what Robert is trying to tell you is that you need to make your own life become emotionally independent from us." Emotionally independent. Those were her exact words. As if wanting to be with my only son and my only grandson after my wife's death was an illness. "I'm not asking you to support me," I said, feeling humiliated. I just want to be part of the family." "And you are," Robert replied, but without conviction. "But you also have to understand that we need our space." Space. They always talked about space, as if my presence was toxic. From that day on, they started setting rules. Rules for visiting me. "Dad," Robert said on the phone, "from now on, how about you call before coming over, just to make sure it's a good time? Call ahead, to visit my own family, as if I were a salesman knocking on doors." But I agreed, because I still had hope that things would get better, because I still believed that Robert, deep down, loved me. The visits became less frequent and more awkward. When I called to ask if I could come see them, they always had an excuse. "Today's not good, Dad. Patricia sa migraine." "Today's not good, Dad. Matthew has a lot of homework." "Today's not good, Dad. We're going out with friends." And when they finally gave me permission to go, The tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Patricia would lock herself in her room or go run errands. Robert would constantly check his phone, as if waiting for an urgent call to give him an excuse to end my visit. And Matthew? My poor Matthew started acting differently around me. "Grandpa," he said one day, "why does Mommy always come when Mom doesn't want you to?" That question shattered my soul. My 6-year-old grandson had picked up on his mother's hostility toward me. He had learned that my presence was a source of conflict in his home. "Who told you that, son?" I asked him. "Nobody told me," he replied with the brutal honesty of children. "But I hear Mommy and Daddy talking in their room. Mommy says you come over too much." Too much? When for months I had only been going to their house once a week. Once a week to see my only family. But what hurt the most was realizing that Robert never defended me. He never told Patricia, "He's my dad, he has the right to come over when he wants." He never explained to Matthew, "Your grandpa loves us very much. That's why he visits." On the contrary, every time I arrived, I saw in Robert's eyes a mix of resignation and annoyance, as if my presence was a problem he had to tolerate. One day, when Matthew turned 7, I decided to do something special. I bought him a new bicycle, one of those he had been asking for months. It was expensive, but I wanted to see that smile on his little face. When I arrived at the house with the bike, Patricia came out furious. "What is this?" she yelled. "It's a gift for Matthew," I replied, confused by her reaction. "We already told you he didn't need a new bike. The one he has is perfectly fine." Robert came out of the house hearing his wife's screams. I waited for him to defend me, to tell Patricia that I had the right to give my grandson gifts. But he didn't. "Dad," Robert said with a tired voice, "you can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I asked, still not understanding. "Buying things without consulting us. We are Matthew's parents. We decide what he needs and what he doesn't." "It's just a bicycle, Robert. It's his birthday." "It's not just a bicycle," Patricia intervened. "It's that you don't respect our decisions as parents. You always do whatever you want." Matthew came out into the yard at that moment, saw the bicycle, and his eyes lit up. "Grandpa, is that for me?" Before I could answer, Patricia grabbed the boy by the hand. "No, Matthew, your grandfather is taking that bike back to the store." "Why?" the boy asked, tears starting to form in his eyes. "Because your father and I decided." I watched my grandson cry as I loaded the bicycle back into my car. I watched Robert just stand there saying nothing, letting his wife humiliate me in front of his son. That night, driving back to my empty house, with a new bicycle in the back seat that I would never be able to give to my grandson, I understood something I had been refusing to accept for months. My son was no longer my son. Patricia had turned him into someone else, and I was no longer welcome in the family I had built with my blood, my sweat, and my money. But I still didn't know to what extent they were willing to humiliate me. I still didn't know what awaited me at Robert's 35th birthday party. On Saturday, March 15th, Robert was turning 35. I hadn't seen them in 3 weeks because every time I called to ask if I could visit, they always had an excuse. But I thought that, for his birthday, things would be different. I thought that maybe, on his special day, my son would remember that I was his dad. I got up early that day, as always. But instead of going straight to the restaurant, I went to the mall. I wanted to buy Robert something special. Something that would show him that, despite everything that had happened between us, I was still his dad, and I still loved him. I walked for hours in that mall, looking for the perfect gift. I saw expensive watches, elegant ties, imported colognes, but nothing seemed good enough. Nothing expressed what I felt for my son. Finally, I stopped in front of a jewelry store. In the window there was a gold chain with a medal of St. Jude. St. Jude, the patron saint of difficult causes. The same saint I had prayed to every day during the hardest years of my business. "That chain," I said to the salesman. "How much is it?" $2,000, sir. It's 14-karat gold, handmade. $2,000. Almost a month's profit from one of my restaurants. But it was for Robert, for my son. I'll take it. Then I went to a card store and looked for the perfect one that had nice words about sons, about a father's love. I found one that said, "To my son, my pride and my joy, may God bless you always." It was perfect. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a long letter inside the card. I reminded him of all the beautiful moments we had lived together. When I taught him to ride his bike in the neighborhood park, when I took him to his first day of school, when he graduated from college and I cried with pride. I also asked for forgiveness. I asked him to forgive me if I had done anything to upset him, if I had said anything that hurt him. I explained that everything I had done in my life had been for him and his sister, that he was my beloved son and I just wanted to be part of his life. I finished the letter by saying, "Happy birthday, my son. May God give you many more years of life, and may you always be happy. Your dad who loves you, Edward." At 6 in the evening, I showered, put on my best shirt, the blue one Mary Helen had given me for our anniversary, and drove to Robert's house. I had the chain in an elegant box and the card in an envelope. When I arrived, I saw there were many cars parked on the street. The house was lit up, music was playing, I could see people through the windows. Robert had thrown a big party for his birthday, a party I had not been invited to. I stood outside my car for several minutes, looking at that house that I had bought, full of people I didn't know, celebrating my son who no longer wanted me there. For a moment I thought about leaving, about going back to my house, leaving the gift on the table and saying nothing, but then I remembered my dad's words. "Edward, a man never runs from his problems. A man faces them with dignity." I took a deep breath, grabbed the gift, and walked to the front door. I rang the doorbell and waited. Inside, I could hear laughter, music, the sound of people having a good time. Finally, Patricia opened the door. Her face changed completely when she saw me. The smile vanished instantly, and her eyes filled with annoyance. "Dad!" she said, without inviting me in. "What are you doing here?" "I came to wish Robert a happy birthday," I replied, showing her the gift. "I'm his dad." Patricia stood in the doorway, blocking my entry. Over her shoulder, I could see all the people inside. There were at least 50 people, friends, colleagues, neighbors, all celebrating my son. "Did Robert know you were coming?" Patricia asked. "No," I admitted. "I wanted to surprise him." Patricia sighed, as if my presence was the worst problem in the world. "Wait here," she said. "I'll go get Robert." She went inside, leaving me standing on the porch like a salesman, waiting for someone to buy something. Through the open door, I could see Matthew playing with other children in the living room. My grandson looked happy, running and laughing with his friends. Several minutes later, Robert appeared at the door. He was dressed elegantly, with an expensive shirt and dress pants. He looked prosperous, successful. He looked like the man I had always dreamed he would become. "Dad?" he said, but not with joy. His voice sounded tired, resigned. "What are you doing here?" "I came to congratulate you, son," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "It's your birthday." Robert looked back inside, where all his guests were, and then looked at me. "Dad, this is a party with my friends, people from work. It's not the kind of event for—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood perfectly. It wasn't the kind of event for people like me. For an old hick who talked differently, who dressed differently, who didn't fit into his new, elegant world. "I just came to give you your gift," I said, holding out the box, "and to wish you a happy birthday." Robert took the box, but he didn't open it. He held it in his hands as if it were something that made him uncomfortable. "Thanks, Dad," he said, "but this really isn't a good time. I have guests and—" "I understand," I said, even though I didn't understand it all. I didn't understand how my own son could treat me like a stranger. I just wanted to tell you that I love you, son, and that I'm proud of you." Robert looked down. For a moment, I thought maybe he would change his mind, that maybe he would invite me in, introduce me to his friends as his dad. But he didn't. "Dad," he said without looking me in the eye, "I need you to understand that we're not the same as before. I have my life, you have yours, and maybe it's better this way." Those words hurt me more than any physical blow. My son was telling me he no longer wanted us to be family. "Robert," I said, my voice breaking, "I know things have been difficult between us, but I'm your dad. That will never change." "I know," he replied, "but being a dad doesn't mean you have to be involved in everything I do. I'm an adult now. I have my own family." His own family. As if I were no longer part of it. At that moment, one of his friends came up from behind. "Hey, Robert!" the guy shouted, clearly half drunk. "Who's this? Why doesn't he come into the party?" Robert tensed up. I saw his face fill with panic, as if he'd been caught doing something shameful. He's a neighbor, he told his friend. He just came by to say hello. A neighbor. His own father was just a neighbor. The friend looked me up and down, noticed my simple shirt, my old shoes, my tired face of a man who has worked with his hands his whole life. "Oh, okay," the guy said. "And he's not coming in?" I looked at Robert, waiting for him to say, "Yes, of course he can come in. He's my dad." Waiting for him to defend me, to include me, to treat me with the respect I deserved. But Robert just stayed silent. "No," I told the friend, with all the dignity I had left. I was just leaving. I gave Robert a quick hug, a hug he didn't return, and walked back to my car. But as I was about to get in, I heard someone shout my name. "Mr. Miller! Mr. Miller!" It was Matthew. My grandson had run out of the house and was coming toward me. "Grandpa," he said, hugging my legs, "why aren't you coming to the party? There's cake and music and—" Before I could answer, Patricia came running out after him. "Matthew," she yelled, "get back here immediately." "But, Mom, it's my grandpa. I want him to come to the party." Patricia reached us and grabbed Matthew by the hand, yanking him toward the house. "Your grandfather has to go," she told him. "He has things to do." "What things?" Matthew asked with that innocent curiosity of children. Patricia looked at me with pure hatred before answering. "Grown-up things, Matthew. You wouldn't understand." I watched my grandson being dragged back into the house. I watched him look back at me with confusion and sadness, and something broke inside me. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. I got in my car and drove home, feeling an emptiness in my chest I had never felt before. Not even when Mary Helen died had I felt so alone, so rejected, so useless. That night, sitting in my empty kitchen, I opened a beer and tried to understand what I had done wrong. At what point had I lost my son? When had I stopped being his dad and become a burden? I checked my phone, hoping for maybe a text from Robert thanking me for the gift, apologizing for what had happened. But there was nothing. I went to bed that night feeling like the biggest failure in the world. I had built an empire of restaurants. I had educated my children. I had been a good husband, a good father, but none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was that my son had closed the door to his life on me, and I didn't know if he would ever open it again. 3 days after Robert's birthday, my phone rang. It was him. "Dad," he said, and for the first time in months his voice sounded different, less cold. "Could you come to the house this evening? We need to talk." My heart filled with hope. Maybe Robert had reflected on what happened at his party. Maybe he realized he had treated me badly. Maybe he wanted to apologize. "Of course, son," I replied immediately. "What time?" "Around 7 after Matthew goes to bed." I arrived at 7 on the DOT. Robert opened the door with a serious expression, but not hostile. Patricia was nowhere in sight, and the house was strangely quiet. "Come in, Dad," he said, gesturing toward the living room. We sat on the sofa, that sofa I had helped pay for when they moved into that house, and Robert looked me directly in the eye for the first time in months. "Dad," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened on Saturday, and I think we need to clear things up between us." "I've been thinking too, son," I replied quickly, "and I want to apologize if—" "No, Dad," he interrupted. "Let me speak first." I fell silent, waiting. Robert paused for a few seconds, as if organizing his thoughts. "Dad," he finally said, "I know you've done a lot for me, for us. College, the company, this house, everything. And I appreciate it, I really do." I felt my chest lighten. Finally, my son was going to acknowledge everything I had done for him. "But, Dad," he continued, "you also have to understand that I'm not the kid you raised anymore. I'm a grown man, with my own family, my own dreams, my own way of seeing life." "I understand that, son," I said. "I just want to be part of that life." Robert sighed deeply. "And that's the problem, Dad. You want to be part of everything. You want to have an opinion on how we raise Matthew. You want to come over whenever you feel like it. You want to buy things without consulting us. And that can't continue." I started to feel that the conversation was not going where I expected. "Robert," I said, "I only want what's best for you. I've always wanted what's best for you." "I know, Dad, but what you think is best for us isn't always what we want." "What do you want then?" I asked, feeling the hope drain from my chest. Robert got up from the sofa and walked to the window. He stood there, his back to me, for several minutes. "We want space," he finally said, without turning around. "We want. I already imagined the answer. Robert turned around and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face, a mix of determination and pity. It means we need you to distance yourself from us, he said, to let us live our lives without you hovering over us all the time. Robert, I said, feeling my voice break, I'm not hovering over you. I only visit every now and then. I only try to help when I can. Dad, he interrupted, you don't understand. Your presence here creates conflict. Patricia gets stressed when you come. Matthew gets confused because he senses the tension. And me? I feel uncomfortable too. Uncomfortable. My presence made him feel uncomfortable. Since when do I make you feel uncomfortable? I asked, with a pain in my chest that barely let me breathe. Robert returned to the sofa and sat down, but this time further away from me. For a long time, Dad. Since I started to have my own life, you never learned to let me go. Let you go? I repeated, not understanding. Yes, Dad. To let me be independent. You've always wanted to control everything, decide everything, have an opinion on everything, and I'm tired of it. Oh, Robert, I said, trying to stay calm. Everything I've done has been out of love. For love of you, of Patricia, of Matthew. I know, Dad, but love also means knowing when to step away. Step away. My own son was asking me to step away. What do you want me to do? I asked, feeling defeated. Robert took a deep breath before answering. I want you to understand that we are adults, that you respect our decisions as a family, that you don't come over without calling, that you don't give your opinion on how we raise Matthew, that you don't try to solve our problems with money. Every word was like a stab. And if I don't? I asked, even though I didn't want to hear the answer. Robert looked me straight in the eye. If you don't, Dad, we're going to have to take more drastic measures. Like what? Like cutting off communication completely. There it was, the final threat. Either I did what he asked, or I would lose my family forever. I stayed silent for several minutes, processing everything my son had just said to me. The son I had worked day and night for 40 years. The son for whom I had sacrificed my comfort, my time, my money. The son I had loved more than my own life. All right, I finally said. If that's what you want, I'll do it. Robert seemed relieved. Thank you, Dad. I knew you would understand. I got up from the sofa feeling like a 100-year-old man. Just one more thing, I said before leaving. Can I still see Matthew every now and then? Robert hesitated before answering. Yes, but in moderation, and always coordinating with us first. Coordinating. To see my own grandson. I walked to the door feeling more humiliated than I had ever felt in my entire life. But as I was about to leave, Robert stopped me. Dad, he said, I want you to know this isn't easy for me either, but it's necessary. I turned to look at him one last time. You know what the saddest part of all this is, Robert? I said. What? That I would have given my life to see you happy. And in the end, for you to be happy, I have to disappear from your life. Robert looked down and said nothing. I left that house feeling as if I had just lost my son forever. As if the Robert I had raised had died and been replaced by this cold man who saw me as a problem to be solved. That night, sitting in my empty kitchen, I made a decision. If my son wanted space, I was going to give him all the space in the world. If my son wanted independence, I was going to show him what independence really meant. Because it turns out, Robert had forgotten something very important. He had forgotten that everything he had, his house, his company, his comfortable lifestyle, depended on me. And if he could change the rules of the game, so could I. What Robert didn't know was that I had also been making decisions. Decisions that were going to change his life forever. For the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what Robert had asked. I stayed away. I didn't call. I didn't go to visit. I didn't try to see Matthew. I became the invisible dad my son wanted me to be. But I didn't spend those 2 weeks crying in my house feeling sorry for myself. No. I dedicated those 2 weeks to doing something I should have done a long time ago. Reviewing all the documents, all the contracts, all the debts Robert had with me. And what I discovered left me cold. The house they lived in. The mortgage loan was in my name, with Robert as a beneficiary. But I was the one listed as the owner on the public record. I had paid the down payment. I had paid the monthly payments for the first 3 years. Robert had only started paying 2 years ago, and he had already been late several times. The digital marketing company. The $500,000 I had given him to start the business was never registered as a loan. On paper, I was listed as a capital partner with the right to 40% of the profits. But Robert had never paid me a single dollar of those profits. He had never consulted me on important decisions. He had never shown me the financial statements. The cars. Robert's car and Patricia's SUV were financed with me as the cosigner. If they stopped paying, I would be responsible for the debts. The credit cards. For years I had been the guarantor for Robert's credit cards. Cards he used freely, knowing that if he didn't pay, I would have to. In total, Robert owed me over $2 million. $2 million he had spent building his perfect life, his comfortable lifestyle, his happy family, and never, not once, had he mentioned paying me back. But there was something else, something Robert didn't know. 6 months before Mary Helen died, when she was already very sick and we knew the end was near, I had done something very important. I had updated my will. In the previous will from 2010, I left everything to Robert, the restaurants, the house, the savings, everything. I thought he would take care of his sister Sarah, that he would honor his mother's memory, that he would use that money for good. But in the new will, which I had signed in October of last year, things were very different. Robert would now only receive 20% of my inheritance. The rest was divided between Sarah, some charities, and an educational trust for Matthew that Robert couldn't touch until the boy turned 21. Why had I done that? Because Mary Helen in her final days had made me see the truth. Edward, she had told me from her hospital bed, our son is not the boy we raised anymore. He has become selfish, comfortable, ungrateful. If you leave him everything, he will waste it. And what's worse, he will never value the sacrifice you made to give him that wealth. At first, I didn't listen to her. I thought it was the illness, the pain, the medications that made her talk about Robert like that. But later, seeing how he treated me, how he rejected me, how he made me feel like a burden in his perfect life, I understood that my wife was right. Robert had gotten so used to receiving that he had forgotten to be grateful. He had forgotten that everything he had, he owed to me. He had forgotten where he came from and who had paid to get him where he was. But I hadn't forgotten. And if my son wanted independence, if he wanted me to disappear from his life, then I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. That afternoon, after reviewing all the documents for hours, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. "Mr. Hernandez," I said when he answered, "I need you to come to my house tomorrow morning. I have to make some very important legal changes. Tag. What kind of changes, Mr. Miller? The kind of changes that are going to teach my son what it truly means to be independent." That night, before going to bed, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and took a good look at myself. I saw a 6-8-year-old man, tired, hurt, humiliated by his own son. But I also saw a man who had built an empire from scratch. A man who knew what it was to fight, what it was to win, what it was to survive. "Robert," I said to my reflection, "you wanted to play me like I was a foolish old man who doesn't understand anything, but you forgot something very important. You forgot that I built all of this before you were even born, and what I built I can destroy." I went to sleep that night for the first time in months with a smile on my face. Not a smile of happiness, but a smile of justice. Because tomorrow I was going to start collecting all the debts. Tomorrow I was going to start teaching my son that respect is not optional. That family isn't something you can just discard when it's convenient. And tomorrow Robert was going to learn that when you play with fire, you get burned. Mr. Hernandez arrived at my house at 9 in the morning, punctual as always. He was a man my age, who had handled my legal affairs for over 20 years. He knew my family's entire history, all the sacrifices I had made for Robert. "Mr. Miller," he said after reviewing all the documents I showed him, "are you absolutely sure you want to do this? This is going to change everything for your son." "Mr. Hernandez," I replied, "my son already changed everything for me. Now it's my turn." We spent the whole morning preparing the necessary documents. Letters canceling my guarantees, debt collection notices, revocation of powers of attorney that Robert didn't even know he had. Everything perfectly legal. Everything perfectly justified. "When do you want these actions to be executed?" the lawyer asked. "I want all the notifications to arrive on the same day," I said. Let Robert understand once and for all what it means to lose his dad. And if he tries to negotiate, if he comes to apologize? I thought about that question for several seconds. Mr. Hernandez, I finally said, for 40 years I gave that boy everything. I gave him love, money, opportunities, sacrifices, and he paid me back with contempt and humiliation. If he comes to apologize, it will be because he has no other choice, not because he truly understands what he did wrong. The lawyer nodded. I understand, Mr. Miller. When do we start? Today. This afternoon? While the lawyer prepared all the documents, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to visit Mary Helen's grave. I sat on a small chair I always brought when I went to the cemetery, and I told my wife everything that was happening. Honey, I said, you must be laughing up there. You always told me I was too good for my own good, that some people only understand the hard way. And you were right. The wind moved the flowers I had placed on her grave, and for a moment I felt as if Mary Helen was there with me. Robert thinks he can live without me, I continued. He thinks he doesn't need me for anything. Well, we're about to see how independent he is when he has to pay his own bills. I stayed there for 2 hours, remembering all the beautiful moments we had lived as a family. When Robert was a boy and helped me at the restaurant on weekends. When he turned 15 and I threw him a surprise party. When he graduated from college and I cried with pride. At what point had that Robert been lost? When had he stopped being my son and become this cold man who saw me as a burden? Maybe when he married Patricia. Maybe when he started earning his own money. Maybe when he realized he didn't need me to survive anymore. But what Robert didn't understand was that needing me and respecting me were different things. That I wasn't asking him to need me, but to value me. To recognize everything I had done for him. To treat me with the dignity that any father deserves, but especially a father who had given everything for his son. When he realized I wasn't asking him for anything, that 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 I wasn't asking him for anything. All the documents are ready. The notifications will arrive at Robert's house and his office tomorrow morning. Are you still resolved? More resolved than ever, I replied. Very well. I also want to remind you that once this is in motion, it will be very difficult to turn back. The banks will act quickly to protect their interests. I understand. And how do you feel about all this? It was a good question. How did I feel? I feel sad, I said honestly. Sad because I would have preferred things to be different, for my son to have respected me out of love, not fear. But am I not sorry? No, I replied without hesitation. Robert made his decision when he told me to get out of his life. Now I'm making mine. That night, I ate dinner alone in my kitchen, as I had for months. But this time I didn't feel alone. I felt free. Free from the burden of loving someone who didn't love me back. Free from the constant humiliation. Free from pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Tomorrow, Robert was going to receive a lesson he should have learned a long time ago. That respect is not optional, and that actions have consequences. Tomorrow, for the first time in years, I was going to be the one making the decisions, and Robert was going to learn what it truly means to be independent. On Thursday morning, as I was quietly eating breakfast in my kitchen, my phone started ringing like crazy. First one call, then another, then 5 calls in a row, all from Robert. I didn't answer any of them. At 10 in the morning, my phone rang one more time. This time I answered. "Dad!" Robert yelled on the other end of the line. His voice sounded desperate, pure panic. "Dad, I need to talk to you urgently." "Good morning, Robert," I said with a calm I didn't even know I had. "How are you?" "I'm not okay. Not okay at all." "What is this? What are all these documents?" "Which documents?" I asked, pretending not to know what he was talking about. "The documents that arrived this morning. The ones canceling the guarantees, the debt collection notices, He was so agitated he could barely speak. "Dad, this has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake, Robert." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. What does this mean? He finally asked, in a much smaller voice. It means exactly what you wanted, I replied. Independence, freedom, space, everything you asked me for 2 weeks ago. Dad, I didn't mean. You didn't mean what, Robert? You didn't mean that I was no longer welcome in your life? You didn't mean that my presence created conflict? You didn't mean that you needed me to stay away? Yes, but I never said. You never said you wanted me to stop supporting you financially, I interrupted. Of course you didn't. It was very comfortable having a dad you could get rid of emotionally, but who would keep paying all your bills? Dad, please, we have to talk. This is going to ruin everything. Robert, I said, feeling a strange calm, do you remember what you told me 2 weeks ago? That love also means knowing when to step away. Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm stepping away. Completely. I could hear Robert crying on the other end of the phone. My son, who 2 weeks ago had spoken to me with such coldness, was now crying like a child. Dad, he said with a broken voice, I know I messed up. I know what I said was wrong, but please don't do this. Think about Matthew. Think about Patricia. Oh, now I should think about Matthew? I asked. When I wanted to see him, there was always an excuse. When I bought him gifts, you both got angry. When I tried to be his grandfather, you told me I didn't respect your decisions as parents. Can we fix all that? Can we start over? No, Robert, we can't. Because you don't understand what your mistake was. You think your mistake was being rude to me, or being cold, or asking me to stay away. But that wasn't your mistake. Then what was? Your mistake was forgetting where you came from. Your mistake was believing that you earned everything you have all by yourself. Your mistake was treating me like I was a burden, when I was the one who built your entire comfortable life. Robert was quiet for several seconds. Dad, he finally said, I never forgot everything you did for me. Yes, you did forget, Robert. You forgot when you stopped thanking me. You forgot when you stopped respecting me. You forgot when you told me I was an interference in your life. What do you want me to do? He asked. And in his voice there was a desperation I hadn't heard in years. I want you to learn to be truly independent, I replied. To pay your own debts, to maintain your own house, to live on your own money, everything you said you wanted to do. But Dad, I can't. The house payments are too high. The company needs capital to keep operating. Without your backing, everything is going to collapse. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you asked me to disappear from your life. Dad, please, we can find a solution. We can. The solution is already found, Robert. You are going to live the independent life you wanted so badly. And I am going to live the quiet life I deserve after 40 years of sacrifice. And Matthew? Is he not going to see his grandpa anymore? That question hurt me more than I expected. But I had already made my decision. Matthew will see the grandfather his parents allow him to see, I said. If you respect me, I will be there for him. If you don't respect me, you'll have to explain to him why his grandfather isn't around anymore. This can't be happening, Robert yelled. You can't do this to me. Robert, I said, with a firmness I hadn't used with him since he was a child, I'm not doing anything to you. I am simply collecting what you owe me and withdrawing my financial support. If that affects you so much, it's because you were never as independent as you thought. I hung up the phone. For the rest of the day, Robert called me 12 more times. I didn't answer a single call. That night, I finally felt at peace. 2 weeks after that last phone conversation, Robert showed up at my house. He didn't ring the doorbell. He didn't knock. He just stood outside, on the sidewalk, waiting. I watched him from my living room window. He looked terrible. Thin, dark circles under his eyes, desperate, like a man who has lost everything, because he effectively had lost everything. The banks had acted quickly when they realized I had withdrawn all my guarantees. They immediately began foreclosure proceedings. The house, the cars, the company accounts. Everything was at risk. I watched him for half an hour, standing there under the sun, like a punished child waiting for forgiveness. Finally, I went out. Robert, I said. Dad, he replied. And his voice broke immediately. Dad, I need to talk to you. We already talked 2 weeks ago. No, Dad, I need to apologize, for real, for everything. I looked him in the eyes. I saw desperation, yes, but I also saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. Apologize for what exactly, Robert? For treating you badly, for not valuing everything you did for me, for asking you to stay away. He started to cry, for being an ungrateful son. I felt something in my chest. Not joy, but not pain either. It was something different. Maybe. Relief. Robert, I said, do you know why I did all this? Yes, he replied immediately. Because I deserved it, because I was an idiot, because I forgot that everything I have I owe to you. No, I said. I did it because I love you. Robert looked at me, confused. What? I love you so much that I would rather have you hate me, but learn, than have you tolerate me, but continue being the same ungrateful man you were. Robert stayed quiet, processing my words. Dad, he said finally, I lost the house. The banks are going to foreclose on everything. Patricia is furious. Matthew doesn't understand why we have to move. And the company? What about the company? Without capital, without a line of credit, I had to close it. I laid off all the employees yesterday. It hurt to hear that, but I knew it was necessary. And now, what are you going to do? I asked. Robert took a deep breath. Get a job. Anywhere. As an employee. Patricia is going to have to work too. We're going to move into a small, cheap apartment. He looked me straight in the eye. We're going to learn to live on our own money. And you think you can do it? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm going to try, because now I understand that you were right. I was never independent. I was just a rich kid playing adult with his dad's money. We stood there for several minutes, not talking. Robert, I finally said, there's something you need to know. What? I pulled an envelope from my pocket that I had prepared that morning. Inside this envelope is a check, I said. A check for $500,000. Robert's eyes filled with hope. It's the exact amount you need to save the house and keep the company running for 6 more months, I continued. Dad, he started to say. But, I interrupted him, I'm not giving it to you. His face changed completely. I'm not giving it to you, because giving it to you would teach you that you can disrespect me, humiliate me, treat me like trash, and then come running back when you need money. Robert lowered his head. However, I continued, if in 6 months you have proven that you can really support yourself, if you have proven that you learned the lesson, if you have proven that you respect me not for my money, but for being your dad, then we'll talk. Robert looked up. Seriously? Seriously. But on one condition. Which one? That you never ever again tell me that I'm an interference in your life. That you never again ask me to stay away. That you never again treat me like I'm a burden. Robert started crying again. Never, Dad. I'll never do that again. Why, Robert? I said, putting my hand on his shoulder for the first time in months. Maybe the greatest gift I can give you isn't money. Maybe the greatest gift I can give you is teaching you how to be a real man. Robert hugged me. It was the first real hug he had given me in years. Dad, he said through his tears, do you forgive me? I already forgave you, son, I replied, from the day I decided to do all this. And can I bring Matthew to visit you? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Matthew will always be welcome in his grandfather's house. And then I realized something. For the first time in years, Robert was talking to me not because he needed my money, but because he needed his dad. And that was priceless. Listen to me, my friends. Sometimes love hurts. Sometimes loving someone means letting them fall so they can learn to get back up. But in the end, if the love is real, it always finds its way back. What do you all think? Did I do the right thing? Was I too harsh? Tell me what city you're listening from, and what you would have done in my place.